The crystal champagne flute exploded against the marble floor like Victoria Ashford's entire world was about to shatter. 47 witnesses in the five-star Grandview Hotel lobby watched in horror as the golden liquid splashed across the polished surface, but it wasn't the $500 champagne that would haunt everyone who saw it. It was what happened next. The man in the driver's uniform, the one Victoria had just publicly humiliated, the one she'd called worthless hired help, loud enough for everyone to hear, stood there with champagne dripping from his face and clothes, and instead of anger, instead of the submission she expected from someone she considered beneath her, his eyes held something that made every millionaire in that lobby step backward, complete, terrifying understanding of exactly who she was beneath her red designer dress and seven-figure bank account. "Move me," Marcus Williams said, his voice so quiet that people strained to hear, yet so powerful that it would later be quoted in boardrooms across Manhattan, "and I'll move mountains." Those 5 words hung in the air like a prophecy, and Victoria Ashford, 30 years old, youngest partner at her daddy's investment firm, wearing a $30,000 Valentino dress that suddenly felt like a cheap costume, had no idea she'd just assaulted the man who had pulled 17 people from burning buildings, saved the daughter of the most powerful woman in New York's charity circles, and was currently driving a beat-up Toyota not because he was poor, but because he'd spent every penny he had creating a transport service for dying cancer patients who couldn't afford to get to chemotherapy. But let me take you back 15 minutes, to when Victoria first saw Marcus's modest car pull up to her Manhattan penthouse and her face twisted with the kind of disgust reserved for something rotting. "I specifically requested a luxury vehicle," she'd spat through the window before even letting him open her door. "I have a reputation to maintain. I can't show up to the Grandview charity luncheon in this garbage." The word garbage had hung between them like a slap, but Marcus had simply nodded, his weathered hands steady on the wheel of the car he'd bought with his last savings to start moving mountains transport, though Victoria didn't know that name yet, didn't know that 300 desperate people were on his waiting list, begging for rides to dialysis, to chemotherapy, to the treatments that would save their lives but that they couldn't reach because poverty had stolen their transportation along with their health. "Just drive," Victoria had commanded, making her business calls extra loud so the driver would know his place, dropping million-dollar deal references like bombs designed to establish dominance. "Turn the air conditioning up." He did. "Change this music." He did. "Not that. No music." He did. Every command followed without complaint, but something in his dignity, his refusal to be diminished, had irritated her more than rebellion would have. Then came the moment that changed everything. A delivery truck ran a red light, sending a cyclist flying onto concrete with the sound of breaking bones. Marcus had launched from the car before Victoria could process what happened, running toward the injured man while she screamed from the back seat, "Get back here. I have to be at the Grandview in 15 minutes. That's not our problem." But Marcus was already applying pressure to arterial bleeding with his bare hands, his voice calm as he directed bystanders, his movements carrying the muscle memory of someone who'd spent 15 years as an EMT saving lives while people like Victoria complained about being late. The blood that soaked into his uniform would later be visible in every photograph from the Grandview incident, a scarlet testament to the kind of man he really was versus the servant Victoria had tried to reduce him to. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me?" she'd raged when he returned to the car, the cyclist stabilized and ambulance arriving. "The connections I've lost? The impression this makes? I don't pay you to have a conscience." A man's life was in danger, Marcus had said quietly. "Not my man, not my life, not my problem," Victoria had shot back, words that would later be quoted in every news article about what happened next, words that would define her in ways she couldn't imagine, words that would follow her home to her empty penthouse where she'd eventually realize they were the epitaph of the person she'd allowed herself to become. When they'd finally arrived at the Grandview, 30 minutes late, Victoria had stepped out in her red dress that cost more than most Americans made in 6 months and turned to Marcus with the kind of theatrical cruelty perfected by people who'd never faced real consequences. "You're finished. I'll make sure your company knows exactly what kind of driver they're employing. Someone who can't follow simple instructions, who drives a car that belongs in a junkyard, who thinks he's some kind of saint. That's when Margaret Chen, president of the hospital board and arguably the most powerful woman in New York's philanthropic circles, had come running out. Not walking. Running. And not toward Victoria, who donated millions to curry favor with her, but toward Marcus, whom she embraced like a long-lost brother while crying actual tears. This man saved my daughter's life. Pulled her from a burning car 15 years ago. Second and third degree burns covering his arms, but he wouldn't let go. The crowd that had gathered to witness Victoria's grand entrance instead witnessed her complete destruction as story after story emerged. The warehouse fire where Marcus saved 3 children. The bridge collapse where he worked 14 hours straight. The company he'd founded, Moving Mountains Transport, that gave free rides to people going to cancer treatment, dialysis, job interviews that could change their lives. The man she'd called worthless was worth more than everyone in that lobby combined, just measured differently, in lives saved rather than dollars accumulated. But here's what destroyed Victoria completely: when Marcus looked at her, standing there in her red dress with her world crumbling, he didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply said, "The work the Children's Hospital does is important," and drove away in his humble Toyota, leaving her standing on that sidewalk with champagne still dripping from her designer heels, finally understanding that she'd just met the only person in her entire life who'd seen through her performance to the frightened, empty person beneath. What happens next will restore your faith in humanity's capacity for change, but first, Victoria Ashford would have to learn what those 5 words really meant: move me, and I'll move mountains. Because Marcus Williams was about to move her from her penthouse prison to the streets of Queens, from writing checks to holding hands with dying patients, from a woman who threw champagne at servants to someone who would eventually sell everything she owned to fund the expansion of Moving Mountains Transport. This is that story. The story of how the worst day of Victoria Ashford's life became her first day of actually living. And if you've ever wondered whether people can truly change, whether redemption is possible for those who seem irredeemable, then watch what happens when a woman in a $30,000 dress learns the value of a life from a man she tried to destroy. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the hotel lobby, sending golden liquid and crystal shards across the polished surface. Victoria Ashford stood frozen in her red designer dress, her perfectly manicured hand still extended in the air where the glass had been moments before. The entire lobby of the Grandview Hotel had gone silent, every eye fixed on the scene unfolding between the woman who'd just thrown a drink and the man who stood before her, champagne dripping from his driver's uniform. But Marcus Williams didn't flinch. He didn't step back. Instead, he looked at Victoria with eyes that held no anger, only something far more unsettling: understanding. "Move me," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the stunned silence, "and I'll move mountains." Those 5 words would haunt Victoria for the rest of her life, but in that moment, she had no idea she'd just met the man who would shatter everything she believed about power, privilege, and what it truly meant to be human. If you're watching this unfold on Acts of Depth, you know we believe in stories that transform perspectives and touch souls. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about judgment, redemption, and the power of unexpected grace. The morning had started like any other in Victoria's carefully curated life. She'd woken in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, checked her phone for market updates, and dressed in the red Valentino dress she'd bought specifically for today's charity luncheon. At 30, she was the youngest partner at Ashford & Associates, the investment firm her father had built into a Wall Street powerhouse. She had everything: the corner office, the 7-figure bonus, the respect that came from a name that opened doors across Manhattan. But respect built on inheritance is fragile, and Victoria had spent years constructing walls to protect hers. She'd learned early that showing weakness invited attack, that kindness was often mistaken for stupidity, that maintaining distance was the price of maintaining power. Her mother had left when she was 12, tired of the Ashford name and all it demanded. Her father had remarried twice, each wife younger and more decorative than the last. Victoria had learned to be neither decorative nor vulnerable. She'd learned to be untouchable. The charity luncheon was at the Grandview, the kind of 5-star hotel where a single night cost more than most people made in a month. Victoria had called for a car service, specifying, as she always did, a luxury sedan, a professional driver, no conversation. She wasn't interested in small talk with the help. She had 3 calls to make during the drive, 2 presentations to review, and a carefully planned entrance to execute. The Children's Hospital fundraiser was as much about networking as charity, and Victoria intended to work every angle. When the car pulled up outside her building, she barely glanced at the driver holding the door open. It wasn't until she was seated, already scrolling through emails, that she noticed the car wasn't the usual black Mercedes. It was clean but older, a Toyota that had seen better days. The leather seats were worn but meticulously maintained. The air freshener hanging from the mirror was shaped like a small mountain. "Excuse me," Victoria said, not looking up from her phone. "I specifically requested a luxury vehicle." "I apologize, ma'am," the driver's voice was deep, measured. "The company had an unexpected shortage. I assure you'll reach your destination comfortably and on time." Victoria finally looked up, ready to demand a different car, and found herself meeting the eyes of Marcus Williams in the rearview mirror. He was perhaps 45, with silver threading through close-cropped hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. His uniform was pressed, his posture straight, his hands steady on the wheel. There was something about his presence that felt incongruous with the modest car, like a symphony conductor working as a street musician. "This is unacceptable," Victoria said, her voice sharp with the authority she'd perfected in boardrooms. "I have a reputation to maintain. I can't show up to the Grandview, Indiana this." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression unchanged. "I understand, ma'am. Would you prefer I call for another car? There might be a wait." Victoria checked her phone. The luncheon started in 40 minutes. Traffic was already building. She couldn't afford to be late, she was presenting a major donation, and the photo opportunity with the hospital board was scheduled precisely at noon. "Just drive," she snapped. "But I'll be calling your company. This is completely unprofessional." The drive through Manhattan was tense with Victoria's disapproval. She made her calls loudly, ensuring the driver heard every mention of million-dollar deals and exclusive connections. It was a performance she'd perfected, establishing dominance through casual displays of power. But Marcus drove with unshakable calm, navigating traffic with the skill of someone who knew every shortcut and rhythm of the city. "Turn the air conditioning up," Victoria commanded between calls. Marcus adjusted it without comment. "And change this music." The soft jazz was replaced with classical. "Not that." "No music." Silence filled the car. As they waited at a red light, Victoria noticed Marcus's hands on the steering wheel. They were working hands, calloused and strong, but he wore a simple gold wedding band that caught the morning light. On the dashboard, partially hidden by the GPS mount, was a small photograph, a young woman in a graduation cap, beaming with pride. "Eyes on the road," Victoria said sharply, though he hadn't looked away from traffic. "I don't pay for distractions." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his tone remaining professionally neutral. But something in his voice, a quiet dignity that refused to be diminished, irritated Victoria more than anger would have. They were 10 blocks from the Grandview when it happened. A delivery truck ran a red light, clipping a cyclist who went flying onto the sidewalk. Marcus reacted instantly, pulling over and jumping out before Victoria could process what had happened. She watched, stunned, as he ran to the injured cyclist, already pulling out his phone to call 911. "Get back in the car!" Victoria shouted through the window. "I have to be there in 15 minutes. Marcus looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw something shift in his expression. "This man is hurt," he said simply. "I'm trained in first aid. That's not my problem. I hired you to drive, not play hero." Marcus had already turned back to the cyclist, checking his vitals, speaking in calm, reassuring tones. Other bystanders gathered, but Marcus was clearly taking charge, directing someone to redirect traffic, another to watch for the ambulance. His movements were confident, practiced, like someone who'd handled emergencies before. Victoria sat in the car, fury building with each passing minute. Her phone rang, the committee chair wondering where she was. The photo opportunity would have to be rescheduled. The carefully orchestrated entrance she'd planned was ruined. All because a driver couldn't mind his own business. When the ambulance arrived, Marcus spoke briefly with the paramedics, then returned to the car. His shirt had blood on it. His hands were steady as he sanitized them with wipes from his glove compartment. "I apologize for the delay," he said, pulling back into traffic. "I'll get you there as quickly as possible." "Quickly." Victoria's voice was ice. "The damage is done. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? The connections I've lost? The impression this makes?" "A man's life was in danger," Marcus said quietly. "Not my man, not my life, not my problem," Victoria shot back. "I don't pay you to have a conscience. I pay you to drive." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but Victoria could feel something radiating from the front seat, not anger, but something worse. Disappointment. As if she had failed some test she didn't know she was taking. When they arrived at the Grandview, Victoria was 30 minutes late. The doorman rushed to open her door, but she was already stepping out, her red dress catching the light like flame. She turned back to Marcus, her voice loud enough for the valets and gathered guests to hear. "You're finished," she said. "I'll make sure your company knows exactly what kind of driver they're employing. Someone who can't follow simple instructions, who drives a car that belongs in a junkyard, who thinks he's some kind of saint." "Victoria?" A woman's voice interrupted. Margaret Chen, the hospital board president, had come outside. "We were worried. Is everything all right?" Victoria shifted instantly into performance mode. "Oh, Margaret. I'm so sorry. You wouldn't believe the morning I've had. This driver," she gestured dismissively at Marcus, "decided to play paramedic instead of doing his job. And look at the car they sent. Can you imagine? I specifically requested." "Excuse me," Margaret interrupted, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "Aren't you Marcus Williams?" Marcus stepped out of the car slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Hello, Margaret." Victoria watched in confusion as Margaret Chen, one of the most powerful women in New York's philanthropic circles, rushed forward and embraced Marcus like an old friend. The blood on his shirt didn't seem to bother her at all. "I can't believe it's you." Margaret's voice was warm with genuine affection. "Everyone, this is Marcus Williams. He probably won't tell you this himself, but this man saved my daughter's life." The small crowd that had gathered fell silent. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her designer heels. "That was a long time ago," Marcus said quietly. 15 years isn't so long," Margaret insisted, turning to the assembled guests. "My daughter Emma was in a car accident. Trapped in a burning vehicle. Marcus was driving past, he was an EMT then, and he didn't hesitate. Pulled her out seconds before the car exploded. Second and third degree burns on his arms from the flames, but he held on to her." She touched Marcus's sleeve gently. "The doctors said another 30 seconds and—" "You're being dramatic," Marcus said with a slight smile. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Margaret's voice was firm. "You did what you always do. Put others first." She turned to Victoria, who stood frozen in her red dress. "I heard what you said about the accident this morning. That's Marcus, he can't pass by someone in need. It's why he left the EMT service, you know. The emotional toll of seeing so much suffering. But he still can't help himself." Victoria's phone buzzed. She ignored it. Her carefully constructed world was tilting, and she couldn't find her balance. "What are you doing driving cars?" Margaret asked Marcus. "Last I heard, you were." "Life changes," Marcus interrupted gently. "We adapt. I'm exactly where I need to be. Margaret studied him for a moment, then nodded. Well, you must come inside. Join us for lunch. I insist. I'm working, Marcus gestured to the car. And I believe Ms. Ashford wants to file a complaint about my service. All eyes turned to Victoria. The weight of their attention, the judgment in their expressions, made her feel exposed in a way her red dress couldn't shield against. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the one with power, the one others tried to impress. There was a misunderstanding, Victoria managed. Oh. Margaret's tone was polite but cool. What kind of misunderstanding? Victoria's mind raced. She could see the social calculation in the faces around her. Margaret Chen's approval meant more than any donation. One word from her could open or close doors across the city's elite circles. And Margaret was looking at Victoria like she was seeing her clearly for the first time. The car service sent the wrong vehicle, Victoria said, grasping for solid ground. And then with the accident delay, I was frustrated. I may have spoken hastily. Hastily, Margaret repeated. I see. She turned back to Marcus. The offer stands. You're always welcome at our table. Thank you, Marcus said. But I have other clients today. People depending on me. He looked at Victoria then, and she saw no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction at her humiliation. Only that same unsettling understanding. Ms. Ashford, I hope your event goes well. The work the Children's Hospital does is important. He got back in his car, that modest Toyota that now seemed to shine with its own dignity, and drove away. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by people waiting for her to lead the way inside, and felt smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. The luncheon was a disaster. Victoria went through the motions, the speech, the check presentation, the photos, but she could feel the shift in the room's energy. Whispers followed her. Margaret Chen was politely distant. The story was already spreading, twisted and magnified with each telling. The investment princess who berated a hero. The woman in red who showed her true colors. By the time dessert was served, Victoria excused herself. She stood in the marble bathroom, staring at her reflection. The red dress that had felt like armor that morning now seemed garish, like a costume that didn't quite fit. She thought of Marcus's hands on the steering wheel, steady and sure. The photo on his dashboard. The way he'd run toward danger while she sat in the car, worried about being late. Her phone rang. Her father. Victoria, what the hell happened? I'm getting calls about some incident with a driver. Margaret Chen is reconsidering the hospital board position we discussed. Dad, fix it, he commanded. I don't care how. The Ashford name means something in this city. Don't embarrass it. The line went dead. Victoria stared at the phone, then at her reflection. The Ashford name. The weight of it, the price of it, the emptiness of it when stripped of genuine human connection. Victoria left the Grandview through a side entrance, unable to face another moment of polite judgment. She walked aimlessly through Manhattan, her red dress drawing stares she no longer wanted. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she realized she'd never actually walked these streets before. She'd always been insulated by cars and doormen and climate-controlled lobbies. At a corner, she passed a food truck. The smell of coffee and something cooking made her realize she'd barely touched her $300 lunch. But it wasn't hunger that made her stop. It was the conversation she overheard. Did you hear about the accident on 53rd? One construction worker said to another. Cyclist got hit bad. Would have died if this driver hadn't stopped. Man knew exactly what to do, kept him stable until the paramedics arrived. See, that's what I'm talking about, his companion replied. Regular people doing extraordinary things. Not like these rich folks who step over you on the sidewalk. Victoria moved on quickly, but the words followed her. Regular people. Is that what Marcus was? But Margaret Chen had embraced him like family. There was a story there, connections she didn't understand, a life that existed beyond her narrow field of vision. She found herself at a small park, sinking onto a bench. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from her father, from colleagues, from people who'd heard various versions of the morning's events. She turned it off, something she hadn't done in years. A woman sat down beside her, elderly, wearing a simple floral dress. She was feeding pigeons from a bag of breadcrumbs, humming softly. "Rough day, dear?" the woman asked, not looking at Victoria. Victoria almost laughed. "You could say that. That's a beautiful dress," the woman continued. "Red was my daughter's favorite color. Said it made her feel powerful." "Did it work?" Victoria asked, surprising herself. The woman smiled. "For a while. Then she learned that real power isn't about what you wear or who sees you. It's about who you are when no one's watching." She scattered more crumbs. "My daughter was a doctor. Worked in free clinics mostly. Never made much money, but oh, the lives she touched." "Was?" Victoria asked gently. "Cancer. 5 years ago." The woman's voice was steady, practiced with grief. "But you know what? At her funeral, hundreds of people came. People she'd helped, people she'd saved. One man spoke about how she'd stayed with his son all night in the ER, singing lullabies. Another woman said my daughter had paid for her insulin out of her own pocket for months." She looked at Victoria then. "That's power, dear. Moving mountains one person at a time." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Someone said something similar to me today. About moving mountains. Then someone wise was trying to teach you something." The woman stood, brushing crumbs from her dress. "The question is, are you ready to learn?" After the woman left, Victoria sat alone as the sun began to sink lower. She thought about her life, the careful walls she'd built, the distance she maintained. She thought about her mother leaving, about her father's endless demands for perfection, about the loneliness that lived in her penthouse apartment like a permanent guest. She turned her phone back on and searched for something she'd never looked up before: Marcus Williams, EMT, New York City. The articles were all there, buried in digital archives. The warehouse fire where he'd saved 3 children. The bridge collapse where he'd worked for 14 hours straight. The commendations, the medals, the quiet heroism that had defined his career. And then, 15 years ago, the car accident Margaret Chen had mentioned. The photos showed a younger Marcus, his arms wrapped in bandages, standing beside a hospital bed where a teenage girl smiled through her own bandages. But there were other articles too. More recent ones. Marcus Williams, founder of Moving Mountains Transport. A small company that provided free and reduced-cost transportation for people going to medical appointments, job interviews, court dates. The article quoted him: "Sometimes all that stands between someone and changing their life is a reliable ride. We try to be that bridge." Victoria's hands shook as she read. The car that morning, that wasn't a mistake or a shortage. Marcus was the owner. He'd been driving himself, probably fitting and paying clients between charity runs. The modest Toyota wasn't a sign of failure but of choice, of resources redirected to help others. She found the company's address, a small office in Queens. Without thinking, she hailed a taxi. The driver glanced at her red dress in the rearview mirror. "Rough day, miss?" "Yes," Victoria said. "But I'm hoping to make it better." The office of Moving Mountains Transport was tucked between a Dominican restaurant and a tax preparation service on a busy Queen Street. Victoria stood outside, her red dress absurdly out of place among the evening commuters and families heading home. Through the window, she could see a small waiting area with mismatched chairs and walls covered in thank you notes and photos. Marcus was visible through an inner door, sitting at a desk covered in paperwork, still in his driver's uniform. A young woman sat across from him, the same one from the dashboard photo, older now, wearing scrubs. Victoria hesitated. What was she doing here? What could she possibly say? But before she could retreat, Marcus looked up and saw her. His expression showed surprise but not unwelcome. He said something to the young woman, who turned to look at Victoria with curious eyes. Marcus came to the door and opened it. Ms. Ashford. This is unexpected. Victoria started, then stopped. All her practiced speeches, her boardroom confidence, deserted her. I came to apologize. Marcus studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. The office smelled like coffee and the Dominican food from next door. The young woman in scrubs stood as Victoria entered, and Marcus made introductions. This is my daughter, Jasmine. Jasmine, this is Ms. Ashford. The woman from this morning. Jasmine's voice was carefully neutral, but Victoria caught the protective edge. Dad told me what happened. Yes, Victoria said simply. I was awful. Jasmine looked at her father, who gave a slight nod. I'll let you talk, she said. But Dad, remember you have Mrs. Chen's dialysis pickup at 7. After Jasmine left, Marcus gestured to a chair. Victoria sat, trying not to think about what the worn fabric might do to her designer dress. The walls around her told stories in photographs and letters, elderly people standing beside Marcus's cars, children heading to hospitals, families reunited. One photo showed Marcus with a group of drivers, all wearing Moving Mountains t-shirts, all smiling. I looked you up, Victoria said. The company, the work you do. I had no idea. Why would you? Marcus asked, not unkindly. We live in the same city but different worlds. That's just it, Victoria leaned forward. I've been living in such a small world. This morning, when you stopped for that cyclist, I was so angry. But you saved his life. Just like you saved Margaret Chen's daughter. Just like you save people every day. Marcus shook his head. I don't save people, Ms. Ashford. I drive them where they need to go. Sometimes that's a hospital. Sometimes it's a job interview that changes their life. Sometimes it's just home after a hard day. But it's not about being a hero. It's about seeing people. Really seeing them. You saw me, Victoria said quietly. This morning, when I was being horrible, you looked at me and you saw something I didn't even see in myself. You said, move me and I'll move mountains. What did you mean? Marcus was quiet for a moment, organizing papers on his desk. My grandmother used to say that. She cleaned houses for 50 years, raised 6 kids, never complained. People looked right through her, like she was furniture. But she knew her worth. She'd say, they can try to move me, make me feel small. But I know who I am. And when you know who you are, you can move mountains. He looked at Victoria then. This morning, I saw someone trying so hard to be important that she'd forgotten how to be human. Moving you, not physically, but moving your heart, your perspective, that could move mountains. Because someone with your resources, your connections, your platform, who actually sees people. That could change lives. Victoria felt tears spill over, not caring about her makeup. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be different. My whole life has been about maintaining distance, maintaining power. Power isn't the problem, Marcus said. It's what you do with it. You wrote a check today for the children's hospital. That's power used well. But you could do more than write checks. Like what? Marcus pulled out a folder. I've got a waiting list of 300 people who need rides to medical appointments. Elderly folks who can't afford taxis. Parents with sick kids who don't have cars. Cancer patients who can't take the subway after chemo. I've got 5 volunteer drivers and 2 paid ones. We help maybe 50 people a week, but the need is so much greater. Victoria looked at the list, names and stories reduced to lines on paper. Each one a person like the cyclist this morning, like Margaret Chen's daughter 15 years ago. People who needed help and someone willing to see them. What would it take, she asked, to help them all? More cars, more drivers, more coordination. Funding for gas and maintenance. A better dispatch system. Marcus shrugged. I write grant proposals when I'm not driving, but it's slow going. Victoria made a decision that would have seemed impossible that morning. I want to help. Not just money, though yes, that too. But I want to understand. To learn. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Learn what? How to see people. How to be human. How to move mountains the right way. That's not something you learn from a distance, Marcus warned. It's messy. It's inconvenient. It means showing up when you'd rather stay comfortable. Then I'll show up, Victoria said. If you'll let me. If you can forgive this morning. Marcus smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Forgiveness isn't mine to give or withhold. You've got to forgive yourself first. But if you're serious about helping, be here tomorrow at 5 a.m. Wear something you don't mind getting wrinkled. We've got a full schedule. Victoria stood, smoothing her red dress one last time. I'll be here. As she reached the door, Marcus called after her. Miss Ashford? One more thing. That red dress, it doesn't make you powerful. Your choices do. Choose well. Outside, night had fallen on Queens. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, watching families heading home, couples walking hand in hand, life happening all around her. She'd spent 30 years insulated from this world, but now she felt its pulse, its possibility. Tomorrow she would return, not in red designer dress but in something practical, ready to work. Ready to learn. Ready to move mountains the way Marcus did, one person, one ride, one act of seeing at a time. Her phone rang. Her father again. This time, she answered. Victoria, where the hell are you? The Chin situation. I'm fixing it, Dad, she said. But not the way you think. I'm fixing myself first. She hung up before he could respond and hailed a taxi. The driver was an older Sikh man who smiled at her in the mirror. Where to, miss? Home, Victoria said. But tomorrow, everything changes. As the taxi pulled away, she looked back at the small office with its warm lights and walls full of gratitude. Marcus was visible through the window, back at his desk, planning routes for people who needed to get somewhere important. People he saw, people he valued, people whose mountains he helped move every single day. The red dress that had defined her morning no longer felt like armor or costume. It felt like what it was, just fabric. Beautiful, expensive fabric, but nothing compared to the possibility of becoming someone who could look at another human being and truly see them. Someone who could be moved and, in turn, move mountains. Tomorrow, she would begin. But tonight, for the first time in years, Victoria Ashford cried, not from sadness or frustration, but from the overwhelming relief of finally understanding what she'd been missing. The walls she'd built so carefully hadn't protected her, they'd imprisoned her. And a man she tried to diminish had shown her the key to freedom, the simple, revolutionary act of caring about someone other than herself. The city lights blurred through her tears as the taxi carried her home, but Victoria had never seen more clearly. Move me, and I'll move mountains. Marcus had moved her, shaken her from her comfortable perch, shown her a view she'd never imagined. Now it was her turn to start climbing, to start building, to start moving mountains of her own.